Today we'll be taking a look at Taxidermia, a movie that highlights the unfortunate side effects of what happens when you let the Hungarians breed. Directed by Grigory Palfi, Taxidermia is a collection of 3 short stories, which themselves are based on the short stories of Leos Nagy, which follow a different generation of a family, as we see how they're a little bit weird in the head. Starting with World War II, we're introduced to a man named Vendel, a military orderly, living the ideal fantasy of many people on the internet, of being forced to stay in a tiny shack right next to an outdoor outhouse. Living in a remote military outpost under the command of a lieutenant and his family, Vendel is courageously aiding the war efforts by tonguing a candle and submerging his genitals in freezing cold water. Freezing cold water that Lieutenant Oreg catches him using, before forcing him and his fried prawn to stand there with it still submerged in the water, as he explains his daily duties in excruciating detail, because an ice bath is good for the soul. Vendel spends his days performing pointless tasks that serve to simply serve the boss and his family, with it in no way whatsoever contributing to any kind of war effort, apart from the personal war inside of his mind. And because of this, he often slips in and out of reality as his mind enters a world of make-believe, with it at times becoming indistinguishable from real life. A sense of freedom that he can only achieve by creating it in his mind, the only way to escape the dark and bleak realities of the life he's currently trapped in. That being said, Vendel's unfortunate circumstances aside, he's still a relatively strange guy who was pretty ahead of the curve when it comes to modern day trends, as after he spies on Oreg's daughters taking a bath together, he proceeds to let himself into the bathroom after they're done using it, where he begins drinking their used bath water for free without having to overpay some e-girl on the internet to send it him. He starts to develop an unhealthy obsession with these girls, as well as a hole in the wall, as after watching them throw snowballs at each other, his overwhelming lust for Jack Frost kicks into overdrive, and for some reason gains the bright idea to begin doing inappropriate things to himself by using a hole in the side of the shed. But what he doesn't realize while doing this is that a cockerel is watching, and that he's coming along to bite his cockerel. Non-consensual piercings are cool and all, but what he does next certainly isn't cool. Dreaming. Gross. To be more specific, fantasizing about young girls, in, you guessed it, inappropriate ways. I think all that ammonia from the nearby outhouse must be getting to him or something. Yet, for some strange reason, this strange little Hungarian man living in this family shed like some kind of strange little European garden gnome is approached by Oreg's wife for some extracurricular activities. The type of activities that your priest usually tells you to keep to yourself, otherwise your entire family will burn in hell for eternity. And while he's doing this, not only is he slipping in and out of her, but he's slipping in and out of reality as he's imagining something he'd much rather be doing instead. A pig carcass. He's caught with Oreg for the small mistake of accidentally sleeping with his wife, and is immediately executed on the spot for this, due to Oreg being incredibly offended about not being invited to the party. It turns out that all of the splinters didn't entirely break him down there, as we then see that the woman has been impregnated by a man who would have preferred her to be a bacon rasher. 9 months later, or however numbers work over there, she gives birth to a little boy, and like all Hungarian boys, he's born with a tail. Oreg decides to keep the child, because I guess he did lose a slave, why not gain a new one, but first cuts the tail off as the baby screams out in pain. Decades later, and he's a grown man, and we see him at one of his speed eating competitions with his partner Bella, as they're consuming copious amounts of this rather appetizing looking soup, before immediately throwing it all back up into one big vat, so it can all be mixed together and served as seconds. After he's done with his starters, it's time for the main course, where he's eating a large gelatinous cube filled with various pieces of meat, but keeps on looking up as he's trying to impress a woman in the crowd, Gizi, a fellow speed eater that he wants to marry someday. But due to the stress of putting whatever that's supposed to be in his body when it really shouldn't be there, his jaw locks up and he passes out, but luckily for him, all the jelly that he consumed breaks his fall. After waking up in the hospital to Gizi, his partner and his coach, he licks up some of her sweat as it drips from her armpit and onto his face, setting him firmly on the idea of marriage to taste some more of that salty goodness. As next, we then see the pair at their wedding venue, drinking, eating and dancing, as well as his now wife Giza immediately sleeping with his best friend Bella right outside. She falls pregnant after falling on and off Bella's penis repeatedly, with no one really knowing who the father actually is. Either way, Bellatoni isn't told about the speedrun world record affair, as he plans to raise the child as his own. Sometime later, they're invited to attend a party on a boat, where they're both asked to show off their skills to a crowd of people. Skills which consist of sitting at a table for hours and gorging themselves on red caviar when they're starving children in Africa who would have loved a free boat tried. Giza begins to feel rather unwell, as fish eggs and human eggs don't mix so great, before passing out face first in her meal, just like Balatoni did back when she fell in love with him. She's fine, but the fish eggs are not, as she gives birth to a baby boy named Lyoska, which Balatoni may or may not be the dad, continuing the trend of the males in this family not really knowing who their strange father actually is. Years later, and Lyoska is a grown man in the modern day who runs his own taxidermy shop. And by a grown man in the modern day, I mean a grown man almost 20 years ago, as it takes place in 2006, and we're all getting old and going to die soon. He continues the family tradition of being a little strange in the head by continuously attempting to ask out the same cashier at the supermarket every day, as she proceeds to ignore him and continue on with her work. Lyoska hasn't got much apart from his taxidermy shop, and his father, who is somehow still alive, as he lives alone without Giza now, as he puts them more in morbidly obese, as he sits in a chair all day, eating chocolate bars and feeding his cats margarine. Since being left by his wife, Balatoni has not just grown into his belly, but he's grown into a selfish and cold man with little to no love for his son, as he openly admits that he loves his cats more than he loves him due to being disgusted by how skinny he is. Lyoska returns to his father day by day, enabling him with his self-destructive, damaging behavior by buying him boxes of chocolate bars and margarines to feed the cats that get more love than he does. And while Balatoni is eating the chocolate bars without taking the wrappers off, because simple maths explains that that's just more efficient, he calls Lyoska a carcass stuffer, causing the pair to engage in an argument, with Lyoska storming out and leaving his father, vowing to never come back because his father can apparently look after himself. And the next day, while at his work doing his pride and joy, which consists of putting things inside of dead animals, a man named Andor pays him a visit at his shop. He wants Lyoska to perform a job for him, but unlike his usual job of preserving a lifeless animal, he's asked to preserve a lifeless fetus because Hungarians are just different like that. A job that he proceeds to accept, because why not, money is money I guess, before heading back to see his father at the end of the workday after he's cooled down from their argument. But what he didn't realise is that when he left the previous day, he forgot to lock the door to the cat cage, causing them to escape and act out every cat's fantasy of eating their owner's insides. Lyoska walks in to find his father's guts laying on the floor, covering the boxes of chocolate like some kind of strange strawberry syrup, with his entrails leading to the back of the room where the cats have been consuming him. Seeing this for what it is really, an opportunity more than a tragedy, Lyoska somehow transports his father's body back to his workshop with his rather big muscles, where he begins to fill his insides with straw. Standard procedure after losing a loved one. After pulling his tools out of his father's insides, which coincidentally makes for really good tool storage, he proceeds to take his weirdness and make it even weirder by attaching himself to some sort of contraption, where he proceeds to numb himself before operating on his own body. Because if performing taxidermy on dead animals teaches you anything, it's how to properly operate on the human body. He removes various of his different internal organs as they become his external organs, because they're really just more of a nuisance than anything. After taking out all of that useless junk that doesn't really do anything, he sews himself back together with various tubes protruding from his insides, where for his grand finale, decapitates himself with a blade before an automated saw cuts off his arm, because screw that one arm in particular. Sometime later, Andor returns to Lyoska's shop to see how he's gotten on with babysitting his child, and after finding the fetus encased in a ball as one does, and being seemingly happy about it, he pulls out his money and begins searching for Lyoska. But after looking for him for a while, he ends up finding him looking rather lightheaded and in need of a hand. So after coming across the dissected remains of Lyoska and the stuffed remains of his father, like any self-respecting normal person would do, he proceeds to put the pair on show at an art exhibit for all of the worlds to point and laugh that he died with his pee-pee out. The movie then comes to its rather strange end by zooming in far too close to a headless man's belly button as taxidermia comes to a finish, demonstrating what happens when you give the Hungarians video cameras. Before this video comes to an end, I'd like to just give a big shout out and a massive thank you to all of the YouTube members and patrons, the people who every month continue to go out of their way to help support the channel. If you're interested in becoming a YouTube member or a patron yourself, not only are you just generally being a great support, but you also get access to a few little bonuses, like being able to join the private Discord server, where you can then get links to uncensored versions of all videos going forwards, including the massive Saw video that's just released, being fully uncensored and uncut, how I originally envisioned it. So that being said, starting off with this week's new YouTube signups, a massive thank you to Lindsay Sewell, Kingly KMCW, Goobod, Juiced, Di, Clement, Connor Moore, Distracted Snail, Gardog123Z, Courtney Williams, Bright Black Grouse, Dr. Satan, Ty Eves, Pete Slim Jim, Andrew McClurg, Mirend, C. Kai Winstead, Lubas, Murgle, Edwin, Liamaz, I Make Bad Content Are Bad, Old Man Rendy, Christopher, Matthew Tickner, Palmax, Amit, Modpodge, May, Durf, and Sable Zephyr. Now heading over to this week's new Patreon signups, a massive thank you to Romain, Charlie Lowe, Ben Martha, Rachel, Crystal Valentin, Ashley, Jack Zhang, Karma Dan, Sindel Guffey, Aurora, Josh Marshall, Susan Tiller, Romantic Trait, Austin, Max Bassett, Eli M, Wufu1, Faram001, Ayor Ishioka, Fluffy Fox, Big Step in 420, Ronja Liam Morph, Dakota Harworth, Angela Doherty, Julianne Brander, Martina Weddle, Ricard Reitz, Kay, Toby Vasquez, Eric Green, Kitty Cat Kayla, Emmett, Robbie Sotelo, Christian Dahastrom, Apris Yes, Kids Fox, and Ian. So once again, a massive shout out to all of the YouTube members and patrons, and a big thank you to everyone else for watching.